My name is Alper Mermer. I am working for ThoughtWorks UK. And in this talk, I'm going to talk to you about my experiences in displaying what we have in our project team and displaying what metrics that we should track both in our development cycles and in production. Now, these metrics that I'm going to show to you today, again, is not the complete list. It is not a list that you should have as a minimum set. This, again, all depends on what you need at the moment and what the context of your project is. So if you remember my first presentation, at the end, I suggested you to not have a written recipe, a fixed recipe. So you will have to find your own. You will have to determine what metrics you need, which of these metrics that I'm going to show to you is suitable to your project, and how you can use them. Let's start. So I'm going to start with the notion that the quality analyst thing. As QAs, because we are the analysts who have a bigger view of, like a wider view of the project and what's going on in the real world, we should be the ambassadors that are propagating the quality of the project, quality of the product, and the detail of attention that our users are giving feedback to us. What I mean by that is, as a QA, as a tester, my primary point of view is the user, the customer, the end user. I know we are in development teams now. I know we are not a separate silo, but we have to keep that view as the customer, as the user. So we shouldn't be too technical as a dev. We shouldn't be too non-technical. We should find the right balance to create the most quality out of our projects. So please keep that in mind. Please keep that in mind that you are the analysts who determines how the product is doing, both in the development cycle and in production. And always keep that view of your customers, the end users. Right. So why should we care about these metrics? First, it is very important to make your team aware of the trends. Now, by trends, I mean you should be able to show people how things are going. It can be how your bug count is going. I'm going to talk about them all. It's important to make them visible. As QAs, I'm sure that you are having a look at very different things, a broad number of things that you look every day. People might not know that. You might be surprised how other members of your team are ignorant about how the things are going on. It's quite a surprise to them when you come and say, oh, you know that after 100 users, our service is failing completely. How? Wow. You might be able to saying that, okay, now in our production system, if users start to use this flow, things are crashing. I mean, it's not even a bug, it's a showstopper. So you should really make these things visible so people are aware of them. Because in teams, most of the time, our devs, BAs, project managers, whoever, can get too focused on a simple part. They might lose the bigger view of the project and the product itself. So you have to be able to make them visible, those trends, the things that you look at every day, visible to all the teams so that they might benefit from it. Share the pain. You do have a painful job. I know that QAs and testers are suffering a lot. It is a difficult job. It's a difficult job. It's getting more difficult with every day. But that's because it's getting more important. Because a lot more is being expected of you. Yes, the team is responsible with the quality, but you are the guys who are specialized in quality. I do value the different mindset of a tester. So even in my company, even some people might tell you that, oh, there's not a separate role as a QA. There's always technical people who can do the QA stuff. Yes, there are people who can find bugs, but you should be the people who are specializing in it. So you should be the people who are propagating that art, that way of working. So I do value a separate role. I don't believe that separate role of QA is going to be disappearing. It's like saying, oh, we have automated everything, and now our users are robots. So we can determine deterministically what they are going to do. If you get to that point, if you automate your development processes, yes, then you will not need any human QAs. But until then, which I think will never come, you will need a separate mindset, which is looking at a different angle than a creator will. Devs, BAs, or whoever are the people who are looking at our code, our product, as creators. They want to create something. They want something to get out as soon as possible. And that creates some kind of a mother and child relationship. If you are creating something, you tend to not see the bad parts of that thing. You tend to not see the negative cases or the extreme things that you might have seen if you are looking at as a third party. As QAs, we are those people. I'm not saying that we are destructive people, but we are making sure that customers or users cannot break our program. So we try to break it first. So this is a different mindset. That difficult job, that pain that you have every day has to be displayed somewhere so that people, especially your team, see that and acknowledge that and try to make precautions to not have issues. Washed production. Now, I have talked about some tests which need to be executed way later and which you have to put in information radars of your production system. So you have to see what's going on, really. As I said before, like, you cannot replicate the production system in your test environment, in your development environment, in anywhere. Production is unique because there are so much users, so many different ways of using the application. You really cannot replicate everything before going to production. So you have to see what's happening in production. You have to see if there are some choke points or like bottlenecks which prevent users to accomplish things. You should have a nice look at that. Improve ownership. This is very important. Now, the main aspect of spreading the quality over all the team members is this, to increase ownership. Now, in the previous world, what we did as testers we were the last point of contact. So everybody expected us to find every bug that there is, and if something slipped through to production, people would first come to us and ask, why didn't you test this? Because we are spreading the quality now, because everybody is responsible of the quality itself, it should be increasing the ownership. Everybody should feel the pain of failing a feature in production. So this picture is actually from NASA. I always love the idea of NASA putting everybody together in a room when there's a launch, because these people in that room were the people who helped build that space shuttle or that Saturn rocket. Now, you are sending something to outer space, and the people who built that thing is there to see if there's a problem. They own that stuff. If there's a problem, they want to intervene immediately so that it doesn't cause a catastrophe. So production is your outer space. You send something to production, and you have to be there as a team, as the people who have built it, to see if there is something wrong that you have done and how can I fix it. That increases the ownership immensely. Now, I'm sure that you have heard of this philosophy in Amazon, if I'm not mistaken. If you build it, you run it. I actually mean, to me, it means you also own it. So there is no single role, there's no single person who should own the product. So metrics help improve that ownership. Prevent issues. So I think everybody remembers Neo stopping the bullets, right, from the Matrix. Now, it is important to see the trends and see what's going on, to have an idea what might be causing these problems. And if there are small problems that start at the surface, maybe there are things that you can do and prevent them to get bigger, or prevent them to cause more problems. Now, these metrics will help you do that, actually. And when you make them visible to all team, some curious people, because as software engineers, all of us, all roles, like BAs, developers, QAs, we are curious people. We want to have a look at things, and we want to discover things, right? So some people in your team is going to have a look at the metrics and say, okay, hold on, there's something going wrong here. So the production system is behaving differently. What can I do? Let's analyze this stuff and see what's going on wrong. So maybe we can fix it. So these metrics help you to prevent issues as well. But, as I said in the beginning of my talk, not every metric is necessary every time. So you will have to make sense of it. You will have to try and see what I should be using. And again, as I stated in my previous talk, you have to do it incrementally. You cannot guess everything that you're going to need. So you will have to see and check if that is suitable for me or my project. Right. So performance measurements. When I think of a metric, I always start with performance. I don't know. I bet maybe that's because I'm a car fanatic. Speed is important. You have to have a look and see what's going on in your development cycle and in also production. Let's say that I received a lot of questions from my first talk asking, like, do you test, how do you determine the system's performance with automating every service separately in terms of performance? Now, you don't. You get the acting or how service behaves as a separate entity, and then you should also put scenarios which will cover the entire suite as well. So there are two things. First, measure what's going on in your services. See if there are any spikes. For example, in the previous deployment that we had, it can be in test environment, it can be production environment, this service was performing with like 40, 50 milliseconds, right? In our next deployment, this same service started to give responses in 150 milliseconds. Now, it still is a very short period of time. It is acceptable as an end user, but it has more than tripled, quadrupled from the previous metric. So you should be able to put in some warning messages that would give you an idea of the trends. Now, many of the tools will give you what time or how much time your service took to run, your test took to run, your performance took to run, but not many of them would give you a warning if there's a problem throughout the history. So you should be able to easily put in some metrics, warnings about your metrics and inform your people. In almost all the projects that we have all those monitors around, showing us that, okay, this is one metric that we have, the build is red, the bugs are there, whatever. It is very nice to have some monitor which will give you the performance history of your deployments for that particular service. I mean, yes, granted, there can be many services. In that case, you're going to have to rely on the warnings. If you have, for example, 50 services in your system, you wouldn't be able to show 50 separate boxes in your monitors to show every different service. You should be implementing those warning messages so that if a service is behaving differently or like behaving incorrectly, then those monitors will show the problem. Along with seeing the performance of the single service, you should also have some scenarios out there to watch the overall scenarios. For example, A useful thing is journeys again. I come back to journey test. We had our functional journey tests in the morning. We also implement some performance journeys as well. Let's say that you're an e-commerce site. We have a journey. How long does it take for my user, a particular user? You can take some sample data. For example, a user opens my website and searches for a product, and then from the results, it selects, for example, the third result, and then puts it into the basket and checks out, payment done. How long does it take? I know some people are different and they will take different times among these actions, but you can simulate that, right? You can say, okay, they're going to decide for 2 seconds. Like, you can say, now this journey was taking 15 seconds in the first run, but now it's taking 20 seconds. And that's a huge jump. Actually, there are interesting measurements and analytics around this. There are cut-off times in users. For example, I'm just giving an example. If a website is performing under 20 seconds for a journey like that, people are okay with it. But if it starts to go above 30 or 40, then people just get bored and just forego the transaction altogether. So you should have a look to what to show and how long you should be expecting your system to perform. Now, these measurements don't necessarily have to break your builds, but you can say, for example, if there's a certain percentage that is the difference of the percentage, then it will give a warning message. If it's, for example, more than 50%, it will just break the build. So you will not be able to deploy that code to the second environment that you're going to have. These spikes are important. If there is spike, like it can be upward spike, it can be downward spike, you should really go and have a look. Because a downward spike is not always a good sign. You might be expecting a data from a service and it doesn't return you anything. I had this cool thing when I was like in my first year of testing. I was working in a bank, all right? So for my testing purposes, and we didn't have too much automation back then, for my testing purposes, I always use the 12th branch of that bank. And that's some developer hard-coded the branch number into the code itself. So when I was testing things, oh, okay, 12th branch, code is correct. It was deployed into production, and every receipt that the bank was printing had the 12th branch, which was like 1,000th branch in the country. So I missed that. That's one example what hard coding can result in. So if somebody is hard coding a service response to your system, it might be giving you a false positive of decreased runtime. So be aware of that. Security is very important. Now, security testing itself and security measurements is a branch in its own. Again, I'm not going to say that if you implement or if you have those automated security tests, you have a secure system. You have to have penetration tests as well. You have to have some specialists have a look at your system for security. But you really can put in some things, for example, for high security risks. Is everybody aware of the OWASP top 10 securities? Can I see hands? Yeah. So OWASP is this open web application security platform. Did I do it correctly? Anyway, OWASP is an organization that is concerned with security. They are open sourced, and they do check these security warnings or errors periodically. They have a top 10 list of security errors, which is very common. So if you use their tools in your build pipeline, it will automatically and quickly check if your product has those top 10 issues. And it will still report you the other issues that are in the database of their system. So if there's a high-risk issue, which is very obvious and shouldn't be there, you really have to be breaking your build and making people aware so that they can have and fix the build. Now, as a general rule, in our company, ideally, if a build is red, nobody can go home. If somebody has broken something, they either have to fix the build or they should revert their change so that the build is always ready for production. That's what continuous delivery to us is. So if your automated security tests are checking something and finding a high security risk, it should be breaking the build. The trends are, again, here very important. There can be like low-level risks, security risks that might not cause too many problems in itself, but if their number is increasing, then you should be concerned about it. Why is this increasing? Why is this trend now spiking? So, code quality metrics. This is about static code analysis, and there are many tools that you can use for this. SonarQube is a common one that we use most of the time. Test coverage with a question mark. Why do you think I put a question mark on that? I put a question mark because I really don't see that much value in test coverage. I see some value, but if it doesn't mean that because your code, every line of code that you have is visited by a test, it doesn't mean that the test is actually testing the right thing. It doesn't mean that all the combinations of that code lines or functions is covered. So 100% test coverage does not necessarily mean that 100% of the functionality is being tested. It is good, it is beneficial to have that and drive your developers towards having a more test-first focus. But other than that, being an indirect driver of the TDD mechanism, other than that, it doesn't have too much value in the test coverage, unit test coverage itself. So that's why there's a question mark. Cyclomatic complexity, again, in itself, it doesn't mean too much of a thing, but if you have a too complex code, you will have difficulty reading it. And if you have a difficulty reading it, you will have a difficulty maintaining it. Please try to write, I know this is computer science stuff, but please have a look at what cyclomatic complexity is. And if you are writing code, if you are automating things, because this is a Selenium conference, I'm pretty sure that a lot of people here are writing code and using WebDriver or something. Please don't forget the fact that test automation itself is a development activity. It doesn't necessarily have to be done by a developer, but it is still a software development activity. So you would better have the same quality principles that you have in your production code in the test automation code as well. So it is very easy to get lost in this. It is very easy to get to a point where you are over-engineering, but please try to keep the balance and keep the quality of your code high. If you do that, believe me, your test suites, your test automation suites will live more, your tests will be more reliable, and you will be much easier to maintain them. This sketch I love, now code quality measurements, WTFs per minute. So depth of inheritance is very important. There are much more code quality metrics than this, by the way. I'm just including the ones that make much sense to my kind of testing. So if your application or if your code is having too much inheritance in your tests, then you are doing something wrong. Tests should be explicit. They should be defining a behavior. Well, I love Cucumber, basically. I know not all of you do. When I'm using Cucumber, it should be very easy for a non-technical person to go in and read the test itself and understand what it's doing. So it shouldn't be too technical in the front end. I call them front end, the Cucumber features. It should be technical in back end, in your step definitions. So if you have a very deeply inherited system, it will be very difficult to read. OK, now there's this object. There's this instance of that object, and then it calls this object instance, and then this is. If you do it like more than a few times, then you are lost. I even can't remember what I started from. So that's a very important thing to stay away from. Again, distance from main. Instead of having objects, you can have many methods, which do, for example, in order to go to the calculation itself, you have to go control-click in IntelliJ and see, okay, what is this function doing? What is this doing? What is this doing? Like, it is important to have a readable code that is understandable and intelligible by itself. But if you go too many details in the deep levels of your function, then you are getting lost. So please avoid that. Please keep the balance. I don't know, maybe being a consultant is giving me this speech, but I always talk about balance. So I don't have concrete answers to anything. It is all about context. Right. When I refer to API and GUI tests, I'm concerned about the end-user functional tests. Now, when we say GUI, GUI is always end-user, right? We provide the GUI to somebody who will use it. Your APIs can be end-users too. Your APIs can be used by the end-user too, because we have so many companies which provide a lot of functionality through their APIs, and other companies are consuming those APIs. What I'm talking about here is those end-user usable things. Now, their runtime and count is important, because you QAs are going to drive writing these tests. You should know how many tests you have, and you should be able to see how long time it takes you to have the test report ready. Now, I talked about the journey tests, which I would prefer not to have more than 10 minutes. 10 minutes is too high anyways. Like, I would expect them to be in several minutes, 1 or 2. If you have a full regression suite, which we advise not to have, but even if you do, even if you have a high coverage functional GUI automated thing, I would still expect that test to be run not more than in 20 minutes, not more than a half an hour. You should parallelize the shit out of it. So you should have to be able to run things in parallel and try to limit the time that you have in your regression suite. Because feedback is important. It is not very cool if you, for example, start your test suite, run it, and I'll have a look at the results in 2 hours. People are working in that 2 hours. Developers are committing new code in that 2 hours. So if your feedback loop is 2 hours, you actually are losing 1/4 of your day. So please don't do that. Please try to limit the time. And actually, it's not too hard to do. I have automated, it was Turkey's biggest online retailer, and we have automated all the functionality through the GUI. It was a web page. And all the suite run didn't take more than 10 minutes. It is not rocket science. Believe me, it can be done. I know people will come to you and say, oh, we are an enterprise company. We have so complicated tests. We have so complicated business flows. It can be done. If something can be done in 10 minutes, you should be able to automate it to run at most 10 minutes. It's a nice motivation for your testers, because if your testers are seeing that, okay, there are a lot of things and we are getting fast feedback, that's a good motivation. Defects by priority and severity is important. If you are starting to get a lot of high value or high risk bugs, then that's a bad indicator, really. That should be in your done criteria, that no high-level bugs should go to production. So if you have started to have too many high bugs in your sprints or your iterations, there might be something missing. Maybe the quality, the TDD isn't being done good enough. The integration tests are not there. Maybe the automation suite is out of date and it's not maintained. So you should have to go and have a look. Maybe your exploratory sessions are not that fruitful. So it should be an indicator to go and have a look at the system. Obviously, like lesser number of bugs is going to increase the confidence to your system. So a lot of developers came to me when I wrote my automation suites or whatever. They always said that I feel much better now. I feel more, I sleep easier, because I know that there's a security net that will catch some things that might slip from my TDD or pair programming, whatever. So you should be able to increase the confidence in your system. And lesser number of bugs is the ultimate thing. Well, it's not the ultimate thing, but it's a very high priority thing to have. Again, as I talked just in the previous slide, if you have started to have too many reds, too many high-level bugs, you might be doing something wrong. Go have a look at your system. Defects from production is very important. Unique defects, by the way, because 1,000 person can be reporting the same things. You should be able to see how confident that you are in your production system. Your company image depends on it. Some person came to me and asked, well, we don't do too many tests before production. We just deploy into production and see what happens. I asked them, are you the only company in your sector which does the only thing that you do? Because you have to be the only person in the sector so that you can get away with it. If you deploy to production and your users are finding things that they are not happy with, they can easily switch to your competitor. If you don't have any competitor, then go away. Do whatever you do. Or like, I don't want to name any names, but like if your system, though it is like billions of dollars worth, if it is just a system that solves a trivial problem, a social problem, then yes, you might get away with that risk. But if you're a bank and your outbound payments are done by 100 times more than what they should be, then you will not have the same luxury, oh, okay, I will roll back, because the money is gone. The money is in the hands of the people that should not have that money. So you wouldn't have a nice rollback and production monitoring then. So keep that in mind. They should be closely analyzed. There should be something wrong with your processes, so have a look at them. This is very important. Now, it's not pointing fingers. It's not going to separate teams and saying that, oh, your module is not working correctly. It's not to do that. If you are seeing a trend in your production bugs, and some modules are continuously failing that criteria that you have, you should be able to pinpoint that and make that team available to have a look, right? So there are separate modules in your program, separate ways the users use your program, so you should be able to pinpoint what the problem is there, what the problem is in the module. So maybe you will need to cut off that module. Maybe you will have to rewrite it. Maybe you will have to invest a lot of effort and time to fix the problem in it. I love Homer Simpson. He's my idol. Mean time between build failures. Now, I don't know how familiar you are with the continuous delivery pipelines, but our pipelines, literally, we sometimes have sounds. We sometimes have red lamps going on. We always have the monitors telling us that the build is broken. So if your broken builds are decreasing in time of failure, which means that you are having broken builds more often, then again, there might be a problem with your process. Maybe your tests are not good enough. Maybe your TDD sessions are not going well. Maybe you are committing a lot of code, obviously, to break the system because you depend on some local thing in your machine. As a developer, you run the tests all the time with the same setup that you have locally, which produces a green pass, and when you push it to the test environment, it breaks the build. So maybe you have a problem in your local environment and you have to go and fix it. It's a nice indication. And it's a team internal metric, really. Because we sometimes organize these things. If a build is green for a long time, for example, we haven't broken it very recently, we have a party, have a few drinks maybe. And then if, for example, some build is broken and we know which person's code broke the build, then we sometimes fine them, I mean, give them tickets. Which, again, it's not a performance metric. We don't fire them because of this. It's just a nice thing to push people towards. testing process is directly affected by, your testing process directly affects this. If you have a mature enough testing process, you will have lesser and lesser broken builds. Yeah. So once you shift left in testing, which means that you test things before coming into the actual integrated system, you will have less and less number of builds. And my last aphorism, do you have a word, aphorism, aphorisma? Okay. It is this: metrics are there to help your brain. They are not going to replace your brain. So you will have to make sense out of it. You can have thousands of metrics, and it will not tell you anything, really. You will have to go and figure it out. You will have to be the engineer that you are meant to be. Now, there was this trend previously. I'm seeing that less and less in my country, at least. We thought the testers were not engineers. We thought only the developers were engineers. My background is from one of the most respectable software engineering universities in my country. Everybody that I have met previously asked me, why are you a tester? Why don't you write code? Because I love breaking things, that's why. So you are all engineers. You don't have to have a degree to be an engineer. The job that you do is a technical job, and you are the engineers. So you should have to figure things out. You should have the data, analyze that data, and then come to conclusions and precautions. That's it. I think I'm better in time in this one. Thank you very much. Questions?
Thank you for your talk. I have a question about comparing metrics in different environments.
I'm sorry, comparing
metrics
in different environments. Okay.
Yeah, for example, production and test environment, and if you have, for example, some tests that last for 10 minutes in test environment, but we cannot do that in production, what should we do with this metric?
Definitely, that's a good question. Now, it all comes back to those repeatable environments thing in my previous presentation. So you should be able to set up the environments identically. They will not be identical in scale. Your production environment is going to be obviously much bigger in scale, but still you can do some calculations on that. For example, if you say that I have this number of servers for my services, I am expecting this time to be like, according to this formula that I have, if I present that number of users in this environment, I'm expecting this response time. In production, it would be much higher. So you should kind of have a linear increment depending on your scale and the number of users. So you should definitely be able to configure those environments according to your calculations.
Hello. Can we use sometimes, for instance, UI tests via Selenium and REST API tests? Can we use combine REST API tests and UI tests? Sometimes we can write tests. API test instead UI tests, but that test will reproduce steps of UI tests.
Okay. What was the question here? So you sometimes have UI tests?
Did you try that approach?
Yes.
Or it's difficult to automate all UI tests via REST API tests?
No, actually, it's not that difficult, because if you are doing your UI automation with the criteria that you have in your development quality metrics, then you actually have a mature enough GUI test automation that you depend on. And if you are combining your GUI tests and service tests, you still know how fast your services are going to respond. And you know what journey time would be. Now, let's say, okay, if you combine a GUI test and then service test together, obviously the GUI part is going to take much more than the service itself. So you can easily measure that. You can easily make the calculation. Or if you really want to measure the performance of the GUI itself, maybe you will just want to mock the service. And you will just assume that the service is going to respond in a set time period with the correct response. So I don't know if I have answered your question or completely missed your question, but
I think that I have understood.
Okay.
Something.
Sorry for that.
It's okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anytime.
May I question? Can we
Oh.
have such cases when we need end-to-end flow, for example, and it will take some hours, or it's unreal in the world?
Well, if your end-to-end flow is taking several hours, are you really expecting your users to use the system for several hours?
Why not?
Why not? Okay.
For
Well,
example, it's gaming.
sorry?
For example, it's gaming.
Gaming. Okay. Now, I'm a serious gamer myself. I'm not professional, but I love gaming. If you're gaming for several hours, you are actually repeating the same thing for several hours. So, like, you really have to put in some real life scenarios. You have to measure them, and then if you are, for example, doing a stress testing, if you are, for example, testing true time, 1 hour later, 2 hours later, how is my game going to handle the memory? Because it can easily have a memory leak, and after 1 hour or 2 hours of gaming, it will start to swell the memory RAM. So you should still be able to write that yourself as well. You can set things up, you can calculate what the memory consumption will be, and then do it instantaneously. Write something in the memory which will happen after an hour, and then test your things around that. So you should be able to set up the condition that you want your tests to run against.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Hi.
Hi.
So you were saying about making analyze of all the bugs on production by severity, priority, and I want to ask, actually, how much time do you spend for this? How often do you do this? And is there actually a use of this time spent on analyzing? Because you need to analyze all bugs, count it all, and
Well,
is it really useful?
if there wasn't a point to spend that time, I wouldn't have included this in my presentation. So yes, I do find some value in spending time there. How much time? It should be minimal, because you should be putting in mechanisms that will report to you automatically. If you think analyzing means, for example, going into the database, take a full dump, try to calculate what is going on there, that is not what I mean by monitoring. You should be putting in automated ways of calculating that for yourself, that bug count, severity, priority, and then intelligent systems, intelligent programs, which warn you, okay, now we have started to do things differently. Our bug count has increased. I'm not suggesting you going in and spending time, for example, a day in a sprint, every sprint. So you should be able to write in, or you should be able to pair with someone. For example, not every tester has to be technical, but you should be able to pair with a person who has the technical ability to put in that intelligent software so that it reports back to you.
And how often do you make these analysis reports of defects in
Well,
your
how
company?
often? Every time. Like, we write something automated, we write a script that watches that, and then that script runs time and time again with every deployment that we have. So we do just one session of creating that script, and then it runs automatically.
Yeah, thank you very much.
You're welcome. I think that's it. So thank you very much for attending.